Hello everyone. So let us continue our discussion. So in the previous class, I talked about in the end of the termination process. So there are two processes majorly. One is combination and another is disproportionation. There is a third type also, but it's very rare. That happens only when you have higher initiator level and or if your solution is highly viscous, because when your solution is highly viscous, these polymer chain end radical cannot meet with each other, so combination won't happen. So when you have high initiator level, what happens is that the growing chain radical would combine with the initiator radical. Okay, so and then you have the chain being terminated. So here what is happening is your initiator itself combines with the growing chain radical and thereby neutralizing. Okay, so this is the third process. Apart from the coupling as well as the disproportionation, you have a third, that is combination with the primary radical. Okay, now I told you in the last video that apart from your initiation, propagation and termination, you have a fourth process also that is possible in the case of free radical polymerization, and that is what we are going to discuss majorly in this particular video. Okay, so as I was telling you that a fourth process that is possible is called the chain transfer reaction. So often what happens is that when we are talking about the free radical polymerization, the molecular weight that is formed in this particular using this free radical polymerization often it is lesser than what it used to be if we had only termination steps like coupling or disproportionation happening. So that means there is a different kind of route of termination is happening. That is why we are getting polymers with a lower molecular weight. Now, that particular process, though it is like a disproportionation process, but it is different because it leads to polymer chains with a shorter length. That means lower molecular weight, and therefore, this is it's a problem actually, because sometimes if this chain transfer reaction involves too much, it will lead to polymers of very low molecular weight. So it's a problem. So this is a kind of termination route that is being followed, but it's not the usual way. Okay, so this particular termination process is the chain transfer reaction. So as the name suggests, what happens is that if suppose this is Mn radical is your growing polymer chain, it will transfer its radical to another species. And this species can be a monomer, it can be an initiator, solvent, polymer, or any other substance. Okay, so in this process, what you see is this particular radical is transferred onto this particular chain transfer agent, but in the process, it is also getting activated. Okay, but in the disproportionation, if you remember, both the species are getting neutralized. Okay, but in this chain transfer process, when the in the process this chain is getting terminated, but another activated species is generated in the process. So that is the difference between the usual disproportionation and this disproportionation that is happening in the chain transfer reaction. So I hope you understood what do you mean by a chain transfer process. So here, because of chain transfer process, the free radical polymerization often lead to polymers with lower molecular weight. So there is an abrupt termination of the growing polymer chain happening because of chain transfer reaction. So basic reaction, you can represent something like this: growing polymer chain transfer its radical to another species. This is happening because of homolysis happening here to generate a radical, which combines with this growing chain radical to form a neutral molecule. And in the process, a T radical is formed here. Okay, so and so this is the rate constant. So we are not dealing into the kinetics of this particular process. So we are not going into these symbols more because the kinetics is not there in your syllabus. Okay, so let us move further into this process, like how all this transfer can happen, to which all species it can transfer. Let's look into that in the next slide. So here you can see the consequence of chain transfer reaction can be a termination happening. Okay, a simultaneous new radical is formed. Okay, and then a broad molecular weight distribution. Because of the abrupt termination, often what happens, you have number of chains formed is more, but the length of the chain is quite reduced. So all these effects you can see in this particular due to this particular reaction called the chain transfer reaction. So where all this like how all this growing chain can transfer its radical. So in this first cases, growing radical move to other polymer chain. So suppose a terminated polymer chain is this one. Now this is the growing chain radical. What it does is it will abstract a proton from here to generate a radical in this species, and thereby not proton, hydrogen radical is being abstracted by homolytic cleavage of this particular CH bond. So a radical is generated here, that is what you see here. And then in the process, that H radical combines here to form a neutral species in the process. Okay, and this can further continue the process. So this particular chain transfer reaction has led to a branching that is happening in the process. So you see, this is a linear polymer chain. Once the radical is generated here, the monomers start combining in this particular upper fashion. So a branch is generated. Okay. So chain transfer reaction, another effect apart from the low molecular weight is the branching. Okay. Branching can be generated as a result of chain transfer reaction. Another important thing that you will find here is the chain transfer happening because of the kind of self backbiting. This is called backbiting. So what it does is the growing chain radical will backbite its own CH bond, and thereby generating a radical somewhere in the middle of the polymer chain, and therefore a branching can generate here. So branching can be generated by transfer of the radical to another neutral polymer chain, or by transferring the radical somewhere to the middle of its own chain. Okay, so this is possible. So if we look into this particular transition state, it's a 6-member transition. So often this backbeating self polymer chain, this type of chain transfer reaction only will happen if you have this kind of transition state possible in the intermediate. Okay, so thus you generate a radical in the middle, and you can generate a new set of polymer here. So it is a branching that happens here. So branching can be one consequence of this particular chain transfer reaction. Looking further, another way this chain transfer can happen is it can transfer it to the free radical initiator. So if suppose peroxide is example here, so what happens? It will transfer this radical to peroxide, and therefore you have homolysis happening to form a RO radical, and that RO radical will combine here to form a neutral species, and another RO radical that is initiated is generated here, which can further activate a monomer and therefore continue the polymerization process. Another way is by transferring it to the monomer. So how does it transfer? It will undergo a homolytic cleavage here to generate a radical here, and the CH radical that is formed combine here to form a neutral species. So that is, it can transfer to a free radical initiator, or it can transfer it to a corresponding monomer. Apart from that, it can transfer to solvent. CCl4 is a kind of solvent that is often used in polymerization process. So when CCl4 is used, it can transfer to that. How can it happen? You have a CCl bond that can undergo homolysis. The Cl, the radical that is formed, can combine with this particular growing chain radical to form a neutral molecule, and thereby this solvent radical is formed, which can further combine with a monomer to form a activated monomer, and therefore polymerization can happen here as well. Okay, so these are the different ways in which the chain transfer reaction can happen. It can happen via transferring to another polymer chain. It can happen by transferring to itself somewhere in the middle of the chain, or it can happen by transferring the radical to a free radical initiator, or to a monomer, or to a solvent itself. Okay, so these are the various ways in which chain transfer can happen. So consequences is there is abrupt termination. Another thing, consequences, branching can happen. Okay, Another consequence is because of this, a broad distribution of molecular weight is happening. Okay, so all these are a combination of factors that are actually arising as a result of chain transfer reaction, which is the fourth process that happens in a free radical polymerization. So I hope this particular fourth process in the free radical polymerization is pretty clear to all of you. So thank you very much for your attention.